They did not read her crime aloud, because everyone already knew what to call it when a woman stood alone and swollen with life. The hall breathed in judgment, a slow collective inhale, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to hear her break. Pale morning light pressed through tall windows and laid itself across the stone floor like a cold hand, finding her knees where she knelt without being told. She had chosen that posture before anyone could command it, as though dignity, when cornered, learned to fold inward rather than shatter. Her name passed from mouth to mouth in murmurs, never spoken directly, softened into syllables that stripped it of humanity. A girl, they said. Unfortunate. Wayward. Each word carried the careful politeness of cruelty perfected over centuries. She kept her eyes lowered, lashes damp, not from tears but from the effort of holding them back. The child within her shifted, a reminder that time did not pause for disgrace, that consequences breathed and grew even while society sharpened its knives. The magistrate stood above her, hands folded, voice steady in the practiced tone of a man untroubled by the weight of his sentences. He spoke of order, of moral repair, of the necessity of example. He did not look at her when he declared that her condition demanded correction, only glanced briefly toward the benches where respectable faces waited to see how firmly the world would be set right again. Her punishment arrived not as a shout but as a conclusion, neat and inevitable. She was to be married. A ripple moved through the hall, subtle yet alive, like wind through dry grass. Marriage, in this telling, was not sanctuary but branding iron. It was the shape shame took when dressed in ceremony. The man chosen for her stood several steps away, summoned forward by a clerk who could not quite meet his eyes. He was old in a way that had nothing to do with wisdom, his back bent by labor and resignation, his coat worn thin at the elbows. Lowborn, they whispered, as though the word itself carried assent. He shifted his weight, boots scuffing stone, clearly aware that he was less groom than instrument. She lifted her gaze then, just enough to see him, just enough to understand that he had not asked for this any more than she had. There was no malice in his expression, only confusion and a dawning fear of being bound into a story he did not control. For a fleeting moment, pity flickered between them, fragile and dangerous. She extinguished it quickly. Pity, she knew, was another form of erasure. The magistrate continued, outlining terms as if discussing property. The marriage would proceed at once. The child would bear the husband's name. Order would be restored. With each sentence, something tightened in her chest, not panic but resolve. She had been stripped of reputation, of choice, of tenderness, yet some narrow corridor of self remained untouched. She placed one hand over her belly, a gesture small enough to be missed, large enough to anchor her to the truth of herself. Behind her, benches creaked as people leaned forward. This was the moment they would remember later, the moment when disgrace was sealed. Some watched with thinly veiled satisfaction, others with the relief of distance, grateful the spotlight had spared them. A few women lowered their eyes, recognizing the trap laid so carefully that any misstep could send them tumbling into the same abyss. Silence thickened, heavy with the unspoken agreement that this was necessary. The magistrate asked if there were objections. The words hung in the air, ceremonial and empty. No one spoke. The old man swallowed, his throat working, but he remained still. She did not turn to look at the door, though some instinct urged her to. Hope was a treacherous thing, and she had learned its cost early. When the sentence concluded, the sound of the gavel striking would echoed too loudly, a crack that seemed to split the morning in two. It was over, they believed. The future had been decided by men who would never carry its weight. She bowed her head, not in submission but in acknowledgement, as one acknowledges the coming of a storm. As they rose, as the room began to exhale, a strange unease crept along the edges of her awareness. It was not fear, but a pressure, as if the air itself had shifted. Somewhere beyond the thick doors and stone walls, something old and watchful had taken notice. She felt it like a distant thunder beneath her ribs, a presence that did not judge or condemn, but observed. And as she was led from the hall, branded and bound, the world behind her already seemed less certain than it had moments before. Outside the hall, the corridor smelled of damp wool and extinguished candles. Her steps were measured, guided by a hand that touched her elbow with professional detachment. Each footfall echoed, a reminder that her body still occupied space even as her place in the world narrowed. Through a narrow window she glimpsed the square below, carriages waiting, horses stamping, ordinary life unfolding with cruel indifference. Somewhere among those sounds, laughter rang out, sharp and unthinking, and she wondered how easily joy survived beside ruin. The old man followed a pace behind, escorted like a parcel. He cleared his throat once, perhaps to speak, perhaps to apologize for breathing the same air. No words came. She did not turn. Some connections were better left unformed, lest they deepen the wound both had been handed. At the foot of the stairs, a matron pressed a folded paper into her palm, instructions for the ceremony, ink smudged where haste had replaced care. The matron's eyes flickered to her belly and away again, a practiced motion that hurt more than open scorn. As they moved toward the door, a hush spread, not commanded but sensed. The horses grew restless. A draft slipped through the corridor, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and something wilder beneath, a note that did not belong to stone or city. Her breath caught. The child within her stilled, as if listening. For a heartbeat, she imagined a gaze upon her back, steady and unflinching, and the certainty of it sent a shiver through her spine. The door opened. Light flooded in, bright and unmerciful, outlining her figure for all to see. She stepped forward, lifting her chin at last, meeting the day as she had met the sentence, with quiet defiance. Unseen by those who watched, beyond the square and the narrow streets, a presence stirred, ancient and attentive, and the punishment meant to end her story had instead marked its beginning. It was not mercy that waited in that stirring, nor vengeance, but recognition, rare and dangerous. As the doors closed behind her, the echo lingered, unanswered yet altered. Somewhere beyond sight, a decision was being made that would not ask permission of law or custom. And in the fragile space between disgrace and dawn, her fate loosened its grip, just enough to breathe. World was not finished with her. The days following the sentence moved with a peculiar cruelty, slow enough to savor her discomfort, swift enough to deny her rest. News of the impending marriage traveled faster than compassion ever had, carried on tongues eager for novelty. Each knock upon her door brought not solace but proof that disgrace attracted attention the way blood drew wolves. She learned to measure time by footsteps in the street, by the pause before a whisper broke into speech. Gifts began to arrive, though none were named as such. A parcel left on the step contained fabric too coarse for ceremony, folded with deliberate neatness, as if usefulness might pass for kindness. A purse of coins followed, light enough to insult, heavy enough to remind her she was expected to be grateful. These offerings carried the scent of moral satisfaction. They were tokens meant to ease the consciences of those who would not meet her eyes. She accepted them silently, placing each item aside with care, refusing to let bitterness soil her hands. The old man visited once, standing awkwardly at the threshold, hat clutched like a shield. He spoke of arrangements, of practical matters, his voice rough but not unkind. She listened, nodding when required, aware that he was rehearsing a role assigned to him without consent. When he left, relief followed quickly by guilt. Neither of them deserved what waited, yet the world insisted upon pairing them like matching stains. At night, sleep came in fragments. Rain traced nervous paths down the windows, tapping as though seeking entry. It was during one such night that she sensed the first true disruption, subtle enough to be dismissed had her nerves not been sharpened by fear. The horses in the neighboring stable grew restless, stamping and snorting without cause. A dog's bark cut short, swallowed by silence. She rose from her bed, one hand braced against her belly, listening to the quiet that followed, deeper than any she had known. In the morning, a small box rested upon the table where none had been before. No note accompanied it, no seal declared its origin. Inside lay a pair of gloves, soft and finely made, their leather unmarked, their lining warm. They were unsuitable for charity, too elegant to be mistaken for pity. She turned them over slowly, feeling an unfamiliar pressure behind her eyes. Someone, somewhere, had chosen them with intention. Word of the gloves traveled faster than she wished. By afternoon, speculation bloomed like mold in damp corners. Who would gift such a thing to a fallen girl? The question was asked with smiles sharpened by curiosity. Some suggested a secret benefactor, others a mockery more elaborate than most. She answered none of it, drawing the gloves on when she stepped outside, daring the world to read their meaning upon her hands. More tokens followed, each appearing without sound or explanation. A basket of food left warm upon the sill. A shawl draped across a chair she did not remember leaving uncovered. Each object bore the mark of discernment, not extravagance but care. They did not seek to hide her condition or erase her shame, they simply acknowledged her existence. In their quiet persistence, they unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. The scandal ignited when a boy claimed he had seen a man standing at the edge of the square long after dusk, watching her windows. The description was vague, yet charged, shaped by fear and imagination. Taller than most. Still as stone. Gone when approached. Mothers drew their children closer. Men laughed too loudly. The story grew with each retelling, sprouting claws and shadows. She noticed it too, the sense of being observed, though not with hunger or threat. When she walked, the air felt weighted, as if something paced her steps just beyond sight. It did not frighten her. Instead, it steadied her, a presence that refused to turn away. Once, as she crossed the square, she glimpsed a figure reflected briefly in a shop window, dark against darker stone. When she turned, there was nothing. The old man heard the rumors and grew anxious. He spoke of postponing the ceremony, of avoiding attention. She recognized the fear in his eyes, not of scandal but of forces he could not name. She assured him gently that the talk would fade, though she did not believe it. Some disturbances, once born, demanded answers. The magistrate sent a message, curt and displeased, reminding her of propriety. Gifts unaccounted for raised questions. Surveillance followed, poorly concealed. She felt the weight of it like a hand between her shoulders, pushing her forward. Yet beneath that pressure lay something firmer, a counterbalance she could not explain. Each night, the restlessness returned, the animals uneasy, the air thick with expectation. One evening, as twilight bruised the sky, she found a single white flower placed upon her doorstep. Its petals were unblemished, its stem cleanly cut. No such flowers grew nearby. She held it carefully, inhaling a scent both wild and restrained, and for the first time since the sentence, she smiled without forcing herself. That smile marked a shift, small but irrevocable. Mercy had arrived, not clothed in gentleness, but wearing the shadow of something vast and deliberate. Whoever watched her did so not to claim or condemn, but to witness. And as whispers sharpened into warnings, as the town strained toward a reckoning, she understood that the marriage intended to bury her had instead drawn a gaze unwilling to look away. Somewhere beyond the lamplight, a choice hovered, patient and precise, waiting for the moment to step fully into view. Night found her at the edge of the old orchard, where fog gathered like breath held too long. The town slept uneasily behind her, windows dark, judgment finally quiet. She had come because the watching had grown impossible to ignore, because silence pressed harder than fear. A path opened between the trees, leaves damp beneath her boots, and she followed it with measured steps. When she stopped, the world seemed to pause with her. Somewhere close, unseen, another presence breathed, steady, deliberate, waiting without demand or command. The air tightened, as if listening, as if remembering older laws than mercy. He stepped from the mist without sound, tall and composed, his outline shaped by restraint rather than threat. Moonlight traced the line of his coat, dark and unadorned, cut with old precision. She did not retreat. Something in his stillness invited truth. His eyes held no hunger, only a depth that made lies feel small. He inclined his head in greeting, formal as any gentleman, yet the forest seemed to bow with him. When he spoke her name, it was neither question nor claim. It sounded like recognition carried carefully across a threshold he refused to break, alone, intact, waiting. They stood apart, yet the space between them felt deliberate, protected. She folded her hands, knuckles pale, and found that her voice did not tremble. She told him why she had been condemned, not as rumor framed it, but as it had been lived. A promise given in kindness. Trust mistaken for safety. When she spoke of the night that changed everything, she kept her gaze level, refusing tears. He listened without interruption, without judgment, as though every word mattered because it had been spoken. Silence gathered gently around them, holding her story steady against collapse, and letting truth breathe. When she finished, the child shifted, a quiet punctuation neither of them ignored. His gaze lowered briefly, not in shame, but respect, acknowledging life as consequence and vow. He answered at last, voice measured, carrying weight without volume. He named the laws that had bound her, ancient customs warped by fear, and named them insufficient. He did not offer absolution, because she had not asked for it. Instead, he offered witness, the rarest mercy. In his presence, her disgrace loosened, becoming history rather than sentence. The forest seemed to exhale, approving the shift without celebration or sound, between heartbeats alone. She asked him then who he was, though she already sensed the answer in her bones. He did not declare a title. He spoke of guardianship, of borders kept not by walls but will. He said the word Lycan only once, quietly, as if naming a truth required restraint. Power lay beneath his calm like a river under ice. He confessed that he had watched her trial, unseen, not to interfere, but to understand the measure of injustice. It had cost him restraint, patience, and silence sharpened into resolve, earned through centuries of rule over night and beast and man. The truth she offered next was the hardest, spoken slowly, each word chosen like a stone placed across water. The child was born of trust, not seduction, of protection mistaken for promise. She named the man responsible, not to accuse, but to explain why she stood alone. The Lycan listened, jaw tightening once, then stilling. He did not rage. He did not curse. His restraint carried more fury than any shout, and she sensed the depth of it with awe. Justice, she realized, could wear silence as armor, and still cut deeper than blades for those watching closely in shadows. He told her the marriage would not proceed as planned, speaking with careful ambiguity. Not yet, he said, not while truth remained unheard. The words sent a tremor through her, hope and terror braided together. He offered no promises, only a boundary drawn. Until the day arrived, she would not be surrendered to humiliation. His protection was not a cage, but a pause, a space carved against the rush of cruelty. In that pause, she felt something unfamiliar unfold, fragile and alive. Between them, destiny slowed, listening, uncertain how to proceed when power refused its usual violence and waited instead. They parted without touch, without vow, yet the separation carried weight. She returned toward the sleeping town, steps lighter despite the burden she carried. Behind her, the forest closed, swallowing his shape, leaving only certainty. She understood now that she was no longer alone in her knowing. The world remained dangerous, the sentence still looming, but a witness had been claimed. Somewhere beyond the reach of law, a king had listened, and that listening had already changed the shape of what might come. Darkness felt less absolute, threaded with possibility she dared not name, yet carried forward carefully into dawn. High above the town, clouds gathered, heavy with unspent rain. She paused once, hand resting over her heart, sensing the eyes that no longer hid. The child stirred again, answering the same call. Whatever mercy wore its shadow now, it walked beside her. Behind stone walls and written laws, decisions were being prepared. Beyond them, something older had chosen patience. The marriage, the scandal, the punishment remained, but the silence surrounding them had been broken, and nothing broken ever returned unchanged. The night watched her go, measuring the cost of what would follow when dawn demanded its reckoning from kings. In the hush before morning, far from the square and its verdicts, a promise took shape without words. It did not belong to love yet, nor to rebellion, but to attention, deliberate and irrevocable. She crossed the threshold of her door knowing the world would test her again, harder. Somewhere beyond sight, the Lycan turned toward paths only he could walk, carrying her truth like a vow he had not spoken aloud. When the next summons came, it would not find her unheard. Silence had ended, the reckoning would speak with teeth and mercy combined at the altar of fate. Morning crept in pale and cautious, touching rooftops as though unsure of welcome. She prepared herself for the day with steady hands, donning the gloves that marked her difference. Each movement felt deliberate, claimed. Outside, whispers resumed, sharper for having been interrupted by night. Yet something within her spine had straightened, an invisible brace. She carried knowledge now, not comfort, but alignment. The path ahead remained cruel, yet no longer solitary. As bells tolled distantly, she sensed eyes upon her again, closer than before, patient and exact, waiting for the moment restraint would become motion without apology or delay anymore. The town noticed her composure and mistook it for defiance. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The old man watched from a distance, unsettled by a change he could not name. He sensed the ground shifting beneath arrangements meant to be simple. Authority relies upon predictability, and she had become unpredictable. That alone was dangerous. Somewhere, messages were drafted, warnings sharpened. The magistrate felt a chill without understanding why. Order, once declared, expected obedience. It did not expect to be observed in return, weighed, and quietly judged by something that remembered power before law learned language and enforced it with restraint alone. She stepped into the street as herself, not as sentence or symbol. The day opened around her, tense with expectation. Above the rooftops, clouds parted briefly, allowing a blade of sun to cut through gray. It struck her path and vanished. Somewhere beyond stone and human hearing, a decision finished forming. The Lycan had listened. Now he waited no longer in doubt, only in timing. What had been witnessed in silence would soon be answered aloud, and the world that punished her would be forced to listen. When Mercy stepped forward wearing a crown of shadow and teeth bared truthfully, the morning of the wedding rose without celebration, a gray light spreading itself thin across the town as if reluctant to witness what was to come. Bells did not ring. Flowers were absent. Even the air felt restrained, holding back breath. She dressed in silence, her movements careful, deliberate, the gloves drawn over her hands like armor disguised as grace. The gown chosen for her was modest to the point of apology, its fabric pale, its cut intended to erase rather than honor. She fastened it herself, refusing assistance, because this body, changed, judged, enduring, still belonged to her. Outside, carriages waited, their wheels slick with dew. People gathered not in joy but anticipation, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Punishment, when wrapped in ritual, invited witnesses. She stepped forward, chin lifted, and the murmurs followed, softer than before, edged with uncertainty. Something had shifted in recent days, though few could name it. Order still claimed authority, yet it now moved as if aware it was being observed. The old man stood near the entrance of the hall, dressed in his best coat, hands trembling despite his effort to still them. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that instant, an unspoken agreement passed between them. Neither would pretend this was salvation. He nodded once, awkward, almost apologetic. She returned the gesture with dignity, granting him that small mercy. He was not her enemy, merely another offering laid upon the altar of correction. Inside, the hall felt narrower than before, its walls pressing close, eager to conclude what they had begun. The magistrate presided with visible relief, prepared to seal the matter and restore the illusion of control. Papers were arranged. Words rehearsed. Law waited to be spoken into finality. She took her place, hands folded, heart steady. Fear existed, but it no longer commanded her. Something stronger stood beside it now, unseen yet unmistakable. As the ceremony began, a disturbance rippled through the space, subtle at first, like a shift in weather. The candles flickered, flames bending though no door had opened. A hush spread, uninvited, silencing whispers mid-breath. The magistrate paused, irritation flickering across his face. He raised his voice to continue, but the sound seemed swallowed, diminished by a presence that did not announce itself yet demanded attention. The doors opened. He entered without escort, without flourish, dressed not for ceremony but command. His coat was dark, finely cut, bearing no insignia, yet authority clung to him like a second skin. He moved with measured confidence, each step deliberate, unhurried, as though the hall had been waiting for him to arrive before allowing events to proceed. Eyes followed him despite themselves. Fear stirred, unbidden, old and instinctive. She felt him before she saw him, a steady force pressing against her awareness. When their gazes met, something settled within her, a quiet alignment that eased the strain she had carried for weeks. He inclined his head, formally, not as a conqueror but an equal. In that gesture lay acknowledgement, not rescue. Choice breathed between them. The magistrate demanded his name, his purpose, clinging to protocol like a lifeline. The man answered calmly, voice low yet resonant, carrying to every corner without effort. He named himself not by title but by responsibility, guardian of boundaries older than the town itself. When he spoke the word Lycan, it fell not as threat but truth, heavy with memory. A collective shudder moved through the room. Legends had edges for a reason. He stated his objection simply. The marriage, he said, would not proceed. The sentence imposed upon the woman before them violated accords long respected, though long ignored. The magistrate scoffed, invoking law, jurisdiction, the authority of men. The Lycan listened, unmoved, then responded with patience sharpened by certainty. Law, he reminded them, was born from necessity, not supremacy. When it devoured the innocent, it forfeited protection. Silence followed, thick and dangerous. The old man stepped back instinctively, sensing the shift. The Lycan turned toward him, gaze steady, and spoke with unexpected gentleness. He named him blameless, released him from obligation, and offered compensation not as charity but recognition of harm avoided. The man stared, stunned, then bowed, relief breaking through confusion. He left the hall quietly, dismissed without disgrace, spared a fate he had never sought. All eyes returned to her. The Lycan approached until he stood within reach, yet did not touch her. His voice softened, though its strength remained. He addressed her not as subject or symbol, but by name, spoken clearly, without adornment. He told her the choice was hers. She could accept his protection publicly, challenging the sentence and its architects, or refuse and walk her path alone, with no interference from him. Either way, her will would be honored. The room held its breath. She looked at the faces around her, the curiosity, the fear, the sudden uncertainty. She felt the child stir, a reminder of why courage mattered. When she spoke, her voice carried, steady and composed. She accepted his protection, not as refuge but alliance. She would not be hidden, nor erased. The truth she carried would stand in the open, guarded not by secrecy but by resolve. A murmur swelled, fractured, then died as the Lycan turned back to the magistrate. He declared the sentence null. He did not threaten, did not raise his voice. He merely stated what would be. Resistance flickered, then failed. The weight of ancient enforcement pressed down, unseen but undeniable. Authority bent, recognizing a power it could not outvote. As they exited together, the town parted instinctively, creating space where none had been granted before. She walked beside him, not behind, her posture unbroken. Outside, the sky shifted, clouds thinning, light sharpening. People watched, some in awe, some in resentment, all aware they had witnessed a rupture. Order had been challenged not by chaos, but by restraint wielded with precision. At the edge of the square, he paused. This was as far as he would escort her, he said. What followed would require patience, endurance, and courage still. She nodded, understanding the cost. He looked at her once more, something unspoken passing between them, a promise not yet shaped into words. Then he turned away, vanishing into the gathering crowd, leaving behind certainty and questions in equal measure. She stood alone, yet not abandoned. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with consequence. But the rules had been broken, not in fury, but in tension. The world would answer that fracture soon enough. As the bells finally rang, not in celebration but alarm, she placed a hand over her heart and felt hope, sharp and unfamiliar, begin to demand its due. The town did not recover at once. Silence followed the Lycan's departure like a held breath that forgot how to release itself. People returned to their homes carrying the weight of what they had seen, unsettled by the knowledge that law had bowed without breaking, and that mercy, once witnessed, could not be unseen. For her, the hours that followed were neither triumphant nor calm. She stood at the center of a circle newly drawn, no longer condemned yet not fully free, watched now with caution instead of contempt. Days passed, and the promised reckoning came not as violence but erosion. The magistrate's authority thinned, questioned quietly in rooms where certainty had once reigned. Whispers shifted direction. What had been scandal became unease, then reluctant admiration. She moved through the streets with steady composure, refusing both apology and pride. The child within her grew stronger, its presence a constant reminder that survival was not an abstract victory but a living one. The Lycan did not return at once. His absence tested her resolve more sharply than his presence ever had. Protection, she learned, was not shelter from fear but the confidence to meet it. Each morning she rose with intention, accepting assistance only when offered without condescension. She spoke when addressed, remained silent when silence preserved dignity. Slowly, the town adjusted around her, reshaping itself to accommodate the fact that she still stood. When he returned, it was without announcement. She sensed him before she saw him, that same pressure in the air, familiar now. He waited at the edge of the square, not claiming attention. This time, she approached him. They stood facing one another beneath an open sky, equals marked by endurance rather than victory. He asked how she fared. She told him the truth. It was difficult, but it was hers. Satisfaction flickered in his eyes, not possessive, but respectful. They spoke of the future plainly. He did not offer escape, nor demand allegiance. He spoke instead of partnership, of choosing one another not in defiance of the world, but in alignment with it. His power, he said, was not meant to eclipse her strength, but to stand beside it. She listened, measuring his words not by grandeur but restraint. When she answered, it was with the same care. Yes, she said, but on her terms. He accepted without hesitation. The child was born beneath a sky cleansed by rain. No crowd gathered, no proclamations were made. Only quiet witnesses stood nearby, those who understood that beginnings did not require spectacle. She held her child with reverence, knowing the world would test them both. When the Lycan stood at her side, his presence was not command but commitment. He did not claim the child as symbol or heir, but as life worthy of protection and choice. The town watched from a distance as she stepped fully into herself, no longer defined by punishment or rescue. Her name, once whispered with disdain, became spoken with care. Not everyone approved. Some never would. Yet resistance dulled when met with calm endurance. She did not need to conquer the world, she only needed to remain. On the evening they chose to bind their lives together, there was no hall of judgment, no audience hungry for correction. They stood beneath trees that had watched centuries pass without comment. Words were exchanged simply, vows shaped by truth rather than expectation. When he spoke, his voice carried neither command nor oath of dominance, only promise. When she answered, her voice did not waver. The world did not end because a rule had been broken. It continued, altered, quieter in its cruelty. She looked out upon the future knowing it would still demand strength, still wound, still test. Yet it had failed to destroy her when it tried hardest. That knowledge settled within her like iron beneath silk. As night fell, she rested her hand over her child's heart and felt the steady rhythm there. Somewhere beyond sight, the old forces listened, acknowledging a balance restored not through fear but will. The Lycan stood beside her, not as shadow, but as choice. And in that stillness, the story closed not with conquest, but with something rarer, a life reclaimed, a dignity preserved, and a love that survived the world's attempt to decide who deserved to endure.